All right. Yes. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for taking your time joining this session on the user state migration tool, USMT 5. I'm the guy standing between you and lunch at the moment. My name is Johan. I will be your host for the next 75 minutes. I've been an IT guy since I was about 10, when I, after long arguments, finally convinced my dad to buy me a Commodore 64, and, well, it's been that way ever since. Been working with deployment for the past 21 years now. Might not have seen everything, but I've seen a lot, and I'm here to share some of the real-world notes from the field I've experienced when helping customers going from XP to Windows 7 and recently also to Windows 8. The pillars for today's session is mainly first diving into the tools and then learning how they are being used in the solutions that you're supposed to use when you do OS deployment. And those solutions are both MDT 2012 Light Touch, the standalone solution, but also Config Manager. So I'll try to run them side by side all the time when I demonstrate the various options you can do when you do user state migrations. All right. So when I talk to customers about migration, they often came back to me and say, no, we don't need it, because we have a policy that says if the user save something locally on their machine, it's their fault. They are sorry if that information is lost when you migrate the machines. All right. So you have the policy, but users still save data locally. It could be intended or it could be unintended. It could be an application that was misconfigured, so it's accidentally stored documents in the wrong folder locally instead of their home folder on the server. The question I think you should ask is rather, can you afford not to migrate information? Because even if you have a policy, if the data is lost during a migration project, in what way do you think that will not cost any money for the organization to recover that data? Because it will. It may not be drawn from your paycheck, or probably not the user's paycheck either, but it will be a cost nonetheless. And by using these free tools as part of your deployment solution, you can actually avoid that cost and even make your users a bit more happy because they have their documents back, they have some settings back, they have the application settings back, and whatever you decide to migrate. These tools are there for help. They are enabled by default in every solution that Microsoft provides, and they are enabled by default for a reason. They're supposed to be used. Now, USMT is just the enterprise version, the command line version of the easy transfer wizard that's been available since, well, a few years back. There is a scan state exe file that runs the backup. There is a load state exe file that will run the restore. And there is a utility file called USMT utils that you can use, for example, to verify that the store is intact and not corrupted. You can use it to extract files from an already backed up machine without having to do the restore. Or you can simply use it to clean up stuff if a restore process wasn't, well, as successful as you want it to be. So we have the tools, exe files, and then we have templates. The templates, they simply control what's being migrated. And some customers, they have a template that will do one thing. They will migrate Outlook settings and ODBC connections in the control panel. That's it. Other customers, they use it for much, much more. To get files from the local hard drive on the machine, and to do all the settings that you can have in a Windows box. But it's you that actually decides, by changing and modifying these templates, what's being backed up and what's being restored on the machine. Now, one of the most common scenarios is replace. Most companies, they replace between, well, should replace in between 20 to 25% of their machines every year. It's like an ongoing cycle. So a replace scenario is basically, I have an old machine, I back it up, I store the backup somewhere not on the old machine, but on a network share somewhere. And then I do a bare metal of a new machine, and I restore my backup to the new machine. That's the replace scenario. So I happen to have a machine that is sort of in need for being replaced. It's an old XP box. You have a year now to replace them until supports end. And I have done some small customizations to this XP box. I have a custom background image. I have a few documents on my desktop, like users have. And in my pictures, I have the cloud picture I'm using as a background. And if I go to Internet Explorer, version 8 in this case, I have a few favorites. I have my Happy Web Server. I have my VMonstra Monstra Inc., which is the fictive company I'm using in my demos. And I have my blog. So, all right. I have a few favorites. Now, if I open up a command prompt as this user Johan, I won't be able to do any backup because I'm not an admin on this machine. So when you run the backup, you actually need to log out, and you need to log on as an admin or a user with admin rights. I think you get the idea. So I'm logged in as an admin. I will open up a command prompt, if I can type correctly. I will navigate to the USMT folder, which I simply copied from the ADK setup on my server. And I will run scanstate .exe. I will specify which user I would like to capture information from. By default, if you don't specify anything, it will do every user, every profile on that box. But I can actually exclude every user and then say, all right, please include only this particular domain user in your backup. And you can also do this at the restore times. You can actually back up more than you restore later. But for now, I want to back up Johan's profile here. And then I specify what templates I'm going to use. So I'm going to use the two default templates, MIG-app and MIG-user. And of course, you can create templates on your own. You can modify the built-in ones, but you specify one or more templates that will control what's being backed up. And then I need to specify a target where I want to store this backup. So I will store it on a server somewhere. I have a normal file share, which I have write access to. And I'm storing the backup now in the demo1 folder. So assuming I didn't do any typos, it will now back up the Johan profile only, as well as the local computer. Because the USMT doesn't only back up profile, it also backs up the local system in addition to the profiles. All right, scan state returns 0, meaning good. So I will now go to a Windows 8 box, to which I've already logged in as an admin. If I look in the users folder on my Windows 8 box, as you can see, there are not many Johan users on this machine. So there are no profiles already pre-staged. But I will go to my USMT folder. Whoops. Share to completion is good, but you need to. So instead of running scan state, I will run load state. And I will specify the same server again. The MIG data folder or share. And the demo1 folder. And it will restore the backup. It will take a little while, and while this one is actually running, I will simply switch over to the XP machine again, and I will show you the USMT utils command, because this utility can be used to also extract content from a backup if you want to. So for example, I can have a test1 folder which is empty, and I can use the extract switch and specify the store again. Oh. What can possibly go wrong in a live demo? Yeah. So now I actually need to specify the MIG file. This is the store. This is the compressed store from the backup. And then I can specify for example, I only want to extract my bitmap files from this store. I can add a wildcard, and I can specify a folder to where this is supposed to be restored, because this is the syntax, right? Extract, file, wildcards. If you don't specify wildcard, it will restore everything, and then where to extract it. All right, how many think this will work? Not very confident in me, are you? It failed. I did exactly what the syntax said. Except you need to flip this around. Can't follow the syntax. Bam. Now I have restored my files into the test1 folder, and if I drill down into it, I will only find my pictures, because I only, restore the bitmap files. So remember when you do the USMT utils command to actually put the, if you want to have a wildcard, put it last in the command, and then it will work fine. Now, if I go back to my Windows 8 machine, the restore is successful, and I can now log off as administrator and log on as Johan, and then we will verify that the settings actually carried over. The profile is already created, but the Windows 8 will still do its things when I log on the first time on a machine. That will take some time, and by default, there is actually a small animation playing at this point in time, showing you how to use the mouse in Windows 8 and what corners you should put it in to get different menus and such. I disabled that. I don't like that animation. So on my domain controller, I simply have a policy. Oh, that's not a policy. That's a policy. Where I have disabled the first sign-in animation. This one here. Now, if I go back to my Windows 8 machine, it's ready, sort of. Let's see. All right. I got my reports. I got my happy text. I did get my picture, my cloud picture. If I go to Internet Explorer, which is the newer version now, I have my favorites. But is there, something missing here? How about the wallpaper? Yes? Now, why didn't the wallpaper migrate? Why didn't the wallpaper migrate? The correct answer is worth a book. Sorry? I did tell it to. Can you clarify and I will give you the book? You need to specify the correct. No? All right. Sorry? Sorry, guys. It's the wrong manifest. It's the wrong manifest. USMT 5 detected to pick the XP manifest when it restored stuff to Windows 8. Or to Windows 7 if this was being Windows 7. And that can you read about in the release notes for the ADK, which obviously no one did. Now, so what I need to do, I need to revert this one first. to my clean snapshot. I love snapshots. I need to go back to my client again. And since this is a Windows 8 machine, I'm going to deploy this or restore this to. I need to specify the target Windows 7 switch to force it. What? Time machine went off here. I need to specify the target Windows 7 switch to tell it to use the correct manifest. Because in the USMT folder, there are some manifests. Legacy? No. You also can actually delete the old manifest and rename this one to just remove the 7 part of it, and it will work fine. But I think it's easier to just specify this switch. So I will also specify a new folder, demo 2, and I have the target Windows 7 switch. I will run a new backup. All right, I have a new backup. Go back to my Windows 8 machine. Load state. Demo 2. Helps to be in the folder where you have the load state command. You can also do F7 here, actually. It's been around for a while, since DOS 3. Well, anyway. Sorry? That will work. The question was, do I have to be an admin? Well, that will work as a user as well, the F7 stuff. But the load state, the restore, I have to be an admin to run. A normal user cannot run it. In the previous versions of USMT, you can actually run the tools. You can start them. They would fail, but you can start them as a normal user. Now they will actually check that you're an admin. They will fail immediately if you don't have admin rights. All right. Process kicking in. It's doing the restore. In a live migration project, you may have 5, 6, 7 gigs of data that is being copied over the wire. We had customers who had prolonged their deployment projects because they simply didn't take the time to verify how much data the users actually had on their local drives. They only tested when they did their planning that they could, for example, deploy 45 machines within an hour, and then they did the calculation from that. So they could download a 3.5 gig image, but they had 7 gigs of user state information that had to go up to the server first, a 3.5 image going down, and then 7 gigs going back again. All right. So I have a new restore. I will log on. Log on as Johan again. Still will do my profile. How can you verify the amount of required storage before you do a deployment? Well, you can actually run scan state with an estimate command. It won't do the backup, but will report back to you how much the data would require in terms of storage. And now my machine is restored, and this time I got my background wallpaper and all the other stuff as well, because I'm now using the correct manifest. When you use deployment solutions, you don't have to worry. Those developers that Microsoft has, they actually did read the release notes. In fact, I wrote them, but they added them in. So for example, MDT will detect if your target is this, and actually checks for Windows 7, and automatically selects the correct manifest. For config.man, it will simply copy down the correct manifest, and life is good. But this is something you need to do if you work with this on the command line. Now, of course, you're not supposed to do like this. This is useful when you troubleshoot and test your templates, because this way you can test them many, many times quickly until you get them correct. But you want to use the solutions. So on this server, I have a light touch deployment solution, which is a free deployment solution. And I've created a sequence that will run backup only. It's just a very short list of actions that will run backup of my machine. Basically a sequence that will call USMT and do the stuff I did in the command line. So if I go back to my Windows XP client here and start that deployment just by running the light touch script or pushing a shortcut with the light touch script, whatever you prefer. It's kicking in, it's reading the deployment share on my light touch server. Did I say it was free? It's free. I select my sequence. I click next. I specify a location where I want my data to be. And I now also have an optional full Vim backup that I can do. I will select no, but this is something you can actually configure for every manager, for example, at the company. In addition to the USMT backup, you also create a full Vim file of the entire drive as well. It will be big though, but if you're lucky, you don't ever have to use it. Anyway, so that's light touch. Config manager, the same. In config manager, you create a replay sequence. It looks like this. A very short sequence that will do backup only, and the optional full Vim backup if you want to. So if you think these sequences look the same, it's because the config manager team wrote the sequence engine for light touch. And since December last year, they actually own MDT as well. So now we have the same OSD team within Microsoft that are developing both the, well, licensed solutions that costs money and the free versions that, well, anybody can use straight out of the box. But this one you deploy to a collection with a bunch of machines and it will remotely go in and back them up. They don't even have to be logged in. It will still run the backup. All right. So that was replays. Just going to check my notes. This is my session number 3 out of 7. And the obvious reason why I signed up for 7 sessions is, well, 1, I'm an idiot. 2, I like this. I really do. It's a passion. It's a, can't help it. Now, so we did the backup, right? But that's only half the story. We actually need to restore the backup at some point. So that looks like this. If I go to a clean machine, I have a clean machine. And I will configure to boot it on the light touch media, or I pixie boot to get the media going that way. It doesn't matter. You start the deployment one way or another. Put it that way. So this is my new machine now. I have my backup on my server. I will boot WinP4. It will start network. It will connect to my server. And it will give me an option of sequences to select again. I'm going to show you this manually right now, and then later in the session I will show you how to automate this. It's up to you guys. Light touch is just a name, has nothing to do with what you can do with the solution. By configuring the server settings, you can control the level of automation. And I have configured my solution to prompt me for a username and password. I have configured it to prompt me for a sequence selection. my Windows 8 sequence. I have configured it to prompt me for a computer name. This is interesting. I will come back to this one later. This is the restore. This is where I can specify a location to restore my backup. And that's it. When I click Next, the deployment continues. It deploys Windows, runs Windows Update, installs all my applications, and in the end of that sequence, it will restore the backup that I specify here. And again, as I said, I will show you how to automate this in the very event you don't want to have a wizard when you start your light touch deployments. Now, Config Manager is different. How many are using Config Manager here? A good few of you. To get this going in Config Manager, you need to do a mapping, because by default, Config Manager doesn't prompt you like Light Touch does for a folder to restore from. So you need to tell it server-side before you run this process. So in the device and managers or devices that you have, you can import a new computer, PC whatever, with this MAC address. It's a new MAC address. And I specify the source. So I can search for a machine, PC number 3, for example. So I'm doing a mapping now, and the old machine I'm going to replace is number 3. The new machine I'm going to deploy is this one with this MAC address. I can specify the user accounts, and you can also script this, PowerShell, whatever. I set the machine in a new collection to which I have Windows 8 being deployed. And now if I go to my user state migration here and refresh the view, I now have my user mapping. I can review the information. And as you can see, I have not yet run a backup of number 3 because the user state location is empty. But as soon as I actually kick off the replay sequence on number 3, this information will be populated. And once that information is populated, I can simply deploy the new machine, and it will now automatically know what backup to restore because you have specified that on the server side, instead of the default in Light Touch where I specified it on the client side when I started my deployment. All right. Now, USMT 5 in terms of features have about the same features as USMT 4 did. There are some new changes. Most of them are bug fixes. The core reasons for USMT 5 otherwise was simply to support Windows 8. That's the driver behind version 5. But in the customer preview, Microsoft actually, customer preview of Windows 8, they started to put out some information that still is out there. So here is some information on USMT 5 for the Windows 8 consumer preview, which I thought was fun to read. Here you can learn about the verify and extract switches to USMT utils. Here you can learn about some of the new logging mechanisms and stability in terms of broken profiles and such. It will fix now. And this is my absolute favorite. Now, this was beta documentation. But if I go back to my XP client and pull up the help file for the command, of course I have to do the right command. What? That's the wrong XP, the wrong machine. Try again. I will nail this. But it is correct. You cannot run USMT 5 to restore stuff with XP machine. if you need to restore to XP, you actually still need to use version 3, not even version 4. All right, admin again. Command prompt again, and my screen looks weird. There we go. SF does restores shell folder redirection. That's what the switch does. And that one is actually new and working in version 5. It existed in version 4, but it broke things when you executed it. All right. Other than that, same options. You can still do offline WinP. I will show you that in the refresh scenario shortly. If you have locked files, you can enable the -VSC switch, volume shadow copy, which allow scan state to back up open files. It's not perfect, but it's way better than nothing. If you really have problems with locked files, you may have databases, you may have services running and keeping files busy, well, offline copy is more or less your only choice in that scenario. Or you have to stop all these services and databases before you run the backup. I've also seen over the years problems with files ending with like a dot, which is a sort of an incorrect folder name. I've seen weird ACLs on files and folders preventing scan state from happening. If you run into that, there is a Microsoft fellow, don't see in this room, normally hangs around here. Alex has a blog where he posted a script that you can run before the backup process that will look for these and fix folders and ACLs before we run the backup. So it's a pretty cool script. All right, of course, you still have the helper objects. You can do the estimation. You can also list files being migrated without doing a full backup. You can run in a test mode. I show you the USMT tilts command, USMT utils command, and USMT can also do a local group migration. Now, USMT will migrate by default most of the stuff on your machines. Most Internet Explorer settings, your Outlook profile, it can actually migrate earlier Outlooks to newer Outlooks. It will migrate most stuff that you do in the control panel. It will migrate, scan, by default, all local drives for known file extensions. And by all known local drives, it really means all local drives, fixed drives. So if you have a template that migrates AVI files or ISO files, and you that day brought your 3 terabyte external hard drive from home and had it attached to the machine when the backup will run for a really long time, because it also searched that extra hard drive. Normally, I would like to actually only get the C drive. And I will show you how to fix that later. All right. As we learned, load state doesn't work on Windows XP, right? Not version 5. But the source can be XP, Vista, and Windows 7, but the targets need to be Vista and above. If you need to target XP again, you need to use the earlier versions. You can do 32 to 64-bit. That's fine, because I actually migrated my XP 32-bit to a Windows 8 64-bit in my demo. So that works fine. They also fixed the ODBC connection that was broken in USMT 4 when you did cross-platform migrations. Sorry? Sorry, Windows 8 can absolutely be a source. This is more like a migration when you upgrade from an OS. That's correct. Windows 8 can be a source. I should add that. Now, when you saw me running the scan state command, I used switches to control the profiles I want to capture. And if you have like a 3-4-year-old machine, it could be 15 profiles on that box. Unless it's a hospital, because then it will be 115 profiles on that box. where probably 2 or 3 of them are the one you actually want. So either you can specify, like I did, I hard-coded the actual usernames. But there is one switch more, UEL. And in this case, it says 90. That's the number of days since that profile was logged in. So if I specify that switch, it will simply only migrate profiles that actually has been active on that box the last 3 months. And it will skip all the older ones. And of course, it will also migrate the local machine. You can use this for domain migration. You can actually have a machine in domain A and migrate to a new profile in domain B by using these MD and MU switches. It's not like ADMT, the normal migration tool that you use, which just restamps the profile. USMT actually creates a clean and pristine brand new profile in the new domain and only copy over what you define in your templates. Because if you have a 4-year-old box with a profile, it might be big. So USMT can be used for some house cleaning as well. All right, refresh scenario then. Yes? Sorry? Is there an elegant way to exclude service accounts? When I did my backup, I didn't get any service accounts, right? Because I used the -UE star whack star, which means exclude everything. It's like a firewall rule. You flush the table first, and then I only included my domain user. So yes, you can do that. All right, flipping over. Light touch to run a refresh can be done in 2 ways. If I go back to my client here and boot it again on my ISO, you can actually do a pixie boot but still do a refresh if you want to. I won't be able to do it because this machine is actually blank, but I will show you the screen anyway. So I will log in. And of course, I don't need to be local on the machine to do this, even with light touch, because I added Dart to my boot image. And you can see it's running in the left-hand corner. It's a small window waiting for a remote connection. So I can actually go to my server, go to the monitoring node, select the machine, whichever it is, and I can remote into it and do the stuff, even though I'm in WinP at this point. This is cool. So if you have MDOP, you can activate that feature. Go back to my client again. I would now simply select my Windows 8 sequence, give it a name. This is where I can say, all right, if you find a previous Windows version, go ahead and get stuff from it right now, even though I actually pixie booted. As you can see in the green box there, it couldn't find any Windows version on this box because it was a blank disk. But if I booted on a machine that has Windows on it, I will be able to select that one. And then I will have a refresh. And a refresh is back up user state to a folder, apply a brand new image, wipe the drive, well, except for the backup folder, as part of that process and then restore the backup from the local machine. I can also go back to my XP machine, and I can run the light touch script again, but instead, it's running already. I'll start it again. You can't run 2 deployments at the same time. Will be fixed in the next version. No, it won't. And this is where I can select my Windows 8 sequence instead of my backup sequence. If I do this, the same thing will happen. It will run a backup. It will apply the Vim file. It will restore the backup automatically for me. Config Manager, dead easy. You have your normal sequence that you use for bare metal deployment. You simply deploy it to a collection that contains the machines you want to refresh. That's all you have to do. If you do a required deployment, they will redeploy. And no, deploying to all systems is not good. At least not required deployments. It's not good. You need to speak up loud, sir. Oh, that was a good question. Best question all day, actually. This one is yours. I hope those speakers don't start screaming.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. So how do we do this in Config Manager? I want to do offline. Can I do that in Config Manager? Yes, you can. Sort of. In Config Manager, when integrated with MDT, you have UDI, an optional wizard that you can enable in Config Manager. In that wizard, there are ready-made functions to either prompt where to store the backup. It could be that you are refreshing or replacing a branch office and you don't have a local file server, and instead of doing it over the network, you simply want to put it on a USB stick or USB drive. Or you can specify normal network share that could be on a client even. Fair enough. Or you simply enable the wizard and don't display the screens, because if you do, Config Manager will do an offline backup when I push the refresh. Instead of running the backup in Windows like it normally does, instead it will run the backup after it has rebooted into WinP. The only thing that is missing from Config Manager and this UDI thing is the F12 refresh. But I've seen quite many customers are actually figuring out ways how to do that as well by creating a custom USMT package and add that early on in the sequence. I mean, the sequence supports it. You have ready-made functions in that sequence template. Let me see if I can find one here. Where did I have my... Here. This is where you can select in Config Manager to do the offline capture. So it's absolutely possible even without UDI. But the benefit of UDI, it's actually built in when you have the integration, and it's tested very well. All right. Yes? If I have experienced... Absolutely. The question is, have I used Config Manager to deploy servers and also add them with Orchestrator? Yes, I have. The way we do it if this was a server sequence, when you have the integration, this is where you actually, at some point in the restore phase, because the runbook cache option does only work really well there, This is where you can specify to call and execute an orchestrator runbook as part of that sequence. You can also have orchestrator creating deployments in config manager as part of their runbooks, if you want to call it from the normal browser interface, for example. The only thing I've seen that's been a little bit weird in terms of server deployments is roles and features. Some of the roles that you can select here has been I've seen some issues when calling the PowerShell provider to do that, but it's only certain combinations. Otherwise, it's been fine. I hope that answered the question. All right, good. All right. If you can use compress or no compress, well, if you specify that on the command line, yes, we can absolutely do that. The hard link that is enabled by default, it's actually no compress option. The replace is using compress by default because it stores the data on the state migration point in config manager, and that is also always compressed. I have no idea if you can store uncompressed data into the... No, you can't, because it encrypts it. Config manager assigns a unique password to every backup. It has to be protected, so it needs to be compressed in config manager. Light touch doesn't do that, so you can do it in light touch, but all right. Now, I've shown you some of the integration with MDT, and the whole point of this is giving you ready-made options to do automation more efficiently, more dynamically, instead of doing as I did, run specific command lines or select the sequence and select something in a wizard. I want to automate more, and that's something you can do both with light touch and both with config manager. The way it does, or the way this works, is you can do changes using a single text file. So in light touch, the text file looks pretty much like this. Where it will contain the settings that you want to have for your deployments. If I want to specify additional USMT information, like additional command line arguments for no compress or whatever I would like to have, I can simply add them to this text file. And the sequence will automatically pick them up and use them, in addition to the default values it always adds on its own. For example, the target Windows 7 switch, if the target is Windows 7. This is also where I specify my templates that I want to use in my backup. So this was light touch. Config Manager is totally different, because in Config Manager, you need to go to another folder. And edit the same file. It's a bit different. Scan state args is now OSD migrate additional capture options, and then the command line switches that you want to have, in addition to the default ones. And this is how you specify what templates you're being used. In light touch, there was a single line for each template. In config manager, you simply separate them by a comma, every template that you want to use. But again, we are now putting settings in a simple text file that the sequence will actually use and configure USMT accordingly. And the cool thing about this text file is it can be very dynamic. So I can have different settings. So I will copy these. You actually need to have this one as well, otherwise you can't specify options. So I will copy these. I'm going to open up a template that I have. Whoa. I can use dynamics in the text file to determine different settings for, in this case, different locations. I maybe want to have different domains or different users or different templates. I want to back up different stuff in different locations or different departments of my company. This is how I can add that logic in. And like you can do in Config Manager with applications where you can do simulation, you can do that with this one as well. So I can open up a command prompt, and I just need to verify my default gateway here. Let me see. It's probably this one. So this machine is now belonging to the San Francisco. Of course, it shouldn't be. We are in Vegas. This machine is in Vegas. So if I run my simulation, go to that folder, can open up the log file, of course in CM trace, and I can see that it actually figured out that I'm in this site. And since I'm in this site, it's processing the Las Vegas section and assigning these options for my USMT stuff. If I would take in the exact same machine, the exact same sequence, and deployed it in Stockholm, it would have the Stockholm settings. You don't need multiple sequences just to have multiple settings for USMT. You can simply change this in the file a bit. So this is really powerful, and also being able to do the simulation in like 5 seconds, rather than doing an hour deployment, you just realize you did a typo or you missed something. And this is exactly the same for Light Touch and Config Manager. Works the exact same. The only thing you need to pay attention to if you switch between those solutions is that the list of properties that you have may be different for Config Manager and Light Touch. But if you go to the MDT help file, there is actually a reference section. Toolkit reference, properties, which contains a list of all the properties that you can have. And for example, if I check the default gateway one, it will show you whether it works in Light Touch, Config Manager, or in this case, both. MDT adds 280 additional OSD features to Config Manager. And of course, they're being used in the standalone version as well. So before you guys start to customize or create scripts and develop things, download this and see if the stuff that you're trying to create isn't already in there. And if you still want to develop stuff, yeah, do that, but use the built-in scripts that you get here. You get an extremely good logging engine, you get error handling, you get ready-made calls to do databases and stuff, web services calls, calling external scripts, all built in. So instead of writing a VB script for 400 lines, you may be doing the same thing with 40 lines when you do development. So it's not only a solution, it's actually a development framework as well. Now, most of you will not be satisfied with the default templates. You want to either remove stuff or you want to add additional stuff into the templates so they are included in your backup. And the way you do that in USMT is using the templates. And when you start to read the documentation, which they removed in version 5, was a shum file in USMT 4. It's online now, so it's on TechNet. I'll show you the link later. But the documentation says that migration files, that's simply the name of the default templates. All right, fine. Custom files are the one that you create in addition to the default templates. And config file is a special file that is not being used so much in Config Manager, but Light Touch uses it by default to simply provide you with a yes-no list for individual actions. So there's a text file that could have a line that says, Windows Media Player settings, yes. Internet Explorer settings, yes. Without that file, you actually comment out the core templates. It could be 20 lines to remove the start menu, but using a config file, it's a one-liner. But yeah, that's the default templates. So this is an extremely basic template. What do you think this template will do? Well, the interesting part is actually it's data. It says role equals data. Means, all right, this is a profile or template that will copy files and folders. It could say settings, which means it could be a template to copy or migrate registry keys for an application, for example. Then it says system, meaning it will run this template per computer. It could say user, it will run the template per user, per profile that you define. It can say user and system, or system and user, and then it will run the template, one for the system and one for each profile. But of course, if you look at the pattern that I have in the middle here, not much point in running this template for each profile. There are a few profiles that stores data in the C:demo1 folder. But the first line will actually migrate the file name text file. It has to be named exactly file name text, and it has to be in the demo1 folder, or as the asterisk indicates, in any of its subfolders. If I remove the asterisk, the file has to be directly in the demo1 folder to be migrated. Now, what if I want to migrate all text files in that folder? Well, star.txt instead of filename.txt. And the second line obviously migrates the entire demo2 folder. And when you look up the online help, you will find plenty of ready-made examples like this. If you look in the default templates that comes with USMT, I will show them to you shortly, you will see ready-made and good examples. If you see a template like this, truthfully, is it really hard to change that template to copy another file or migrate another folder? Not that difficult. It's quite easy to do. You will learn these templates in a few hours, at least the basics of them. Where you will spend your time is trying to figure out what files and folders you're supposed to copy from your users. But that I cannot help you with, because that is normally unique per organization, the stuff you have. All right. Yes? USMT 5 works with Windows 7 and USMT doesn't work with servers at all, never has, never will. Client only. Oh, sorry. Does it work with Config Manager 2007 and Config Manager 2012? I have not tested USMT 5 on Config Manager 07 for the simple reason it doesn't support Windows 8 deployments. It can manage a Windows 8 box, but you cannot deploy Windows 8 with Config Manager 7. It's not supported, it's not going to happen, ever. You need 2012 SP1 to deploy Windows 8. However, I mean, USMT 5 is just a collection of files. Of course, you can add them to a package in Config Manager 7 and run them. They will work equally well in that scenario. It's just that Config Manager doesn't have it in their own. I mean, they are still using USMT 4 by default. But you can have a custom package and run them in 07 if you like to. But you cannot deploy Windows 8 with them, with Config Manager 7. All right, back to my demo environment. If I go to this folder, for example, this is where Light Touch stores the default templates. So for example, if I open up the MIG user template, it will show you the code or settings, for example, to migrate to my video folder. And you can copy and paste this if you want to migrate something else. If I drill down a bit more into this file, what do you think this line will migrate? Well, QDF files, right? Exactly. If I would like to modify this one to also scan all my local drives for PDF files, not that difficult. Copy, paste, and change. And then you also get the PDF files. Now, I promised to show you how to fix the all local drives issue, because that helper object is causing that. Of course, you can hard code and say, only look at my C drive. But we can do better. It turns out there is a bunch of Microsoft consultants that is gathering under a common name as the deployment guys. They have a USMT script that you can add as a user exit script that will extend the property list for your ini file. And once you have that script being run, config manager, light touch, works with both. When you do, you can actually now add additional properties. And why not use this one? No USMT on drive. If that file exists, it won't back up that drive. Very easy to exclude 5-wire USB external drives once you have this script and once you execute that as part of your ini file. User exit equals and whatever the script name is. Pretty cool. Now, when you have applications, when you have settings for applications, you are very likely to spend a good few hours on that. Because data is easy. Files and folders, dead easy. You learn the templates, as I said, in a few hours. But if you have application settings that you want to migrate, first of all, do you need it? The answer is, it depends. A few years ago, I worked with a somewhat large company. They have well over 1,000 apps, 1,000 applications. They only needed settings for about 15% of those apps, 150, 160 or so. They put the responsibility on the packager that if an application needing a setting to be migrated, it was the application packager's responsibility to create a small USMT template for that application. Some applications, they had a one-liner to migrate an ini file that the application needed. Other applications like Photoshop or whatever, it could be 30 lines to migrate all the settings you normally would have in Photoshop. And then they simply had a VB script that merged all these small XML files into a larger XML file. And they used that as part of their deployment. So imagine that you create an XML file like the one I showed you. How do you get the system to actually use it? Well, in Light Touch, you simply copy it to the folder where you have your wrong machine. Where you have your USMT stuff. For config manager, you copy it to the USMT package, which by default, well, not by default, but in my environment, is stored in the default location. Where is that default location? Windows kits, wait, deployment, user state migration tool. There have your folders. Or if you have an external package for USMT, you can use that one as well. It's fine either way. So you need to copy the template that you create to the right folder. And of course, you need to configure the rules to actually use it. If I go back to my ini file, you need to add your happy template, XML, whatever you called it, to the rules file as well. And then it will be used. Now, if you go back to the applications, The way you can find out if you need apps is very simple. If you deploy a new machine to a user, and you have to do something on that machine, either go to the machine or remote into it and do something, before they can use a particular application. If you or help desk needs to do that after a successful deployment to that machine, you have found your priority 1 application to create a template for. Because instead of going to 500 machines, spend 10 minutes each, you can actually create a template that will do that job instead for you. The problem is often finding out, all right, where are the applications storing its settings? Because if you pick up the phone and call help desk and ask for USMT template, they normally go, okay? And then you ask for a list of files and folders and registry keys that their application needs to be migrated. It's not very often you get that list. You need to figure out that on your own. And your best friend in that scenario is, and will ever be, Process Monitor. How many have not used Process Monitor? You see, no hands in the room. But in terms of applications, this is my favorite application, Notepad. You have probably seen that if you do stuff in Notepad, like changing the font to Wingdings, the next time I start Notepad, it's still Wingdings. So apparently Notepad is storing settings somewhere in my system, and I don't want to have to go to every machine and go into Notepad and change font. I would like to create a template to do that instead, because the Notepad developer wouldn't tell me where the settings are either. All right. So what you can do, of course, is start Process Monitor, and you set a filter for Notepad .exe, so that Process Monitor only monitors that application that you're working with. And Process Monitor will, as probably you are aware of, monitor both files, folders, and registry when you have the filter I had. So if I start up Notepad, change the font back to Times, and close Notepad, because Notepad, like most applications or many applications, store settings when I just close the application. So now you can see that if I stop the process here, it was about 6,000 events to change font in Notepad. So if I search for Times, you can see that Notepad starts by trying to create the Times font. No, it actually tries to open it, but it's called create file, but it more like if it exists, opens it. And it tries to do that quite a few times, to be sure. And then a few more times, but this time the italic one, Times italic, and again italic, Times bold italic, Times bold, Times again. Was at least 3-4 seconds since the last time, so you need to try again. And again. And again. And again. Now at least it's reading the font. That's good. But this part is interesting, because this is where I can see that Notepad actually wrote something in my registry. And if I hover over the value here, let me see and try to search for that Times again. The value it wrote was Times New Roman. And now I can have the monitor hypnotize the registry, go to that location, which is where Notepad is storing its settings. So now I would simply create a template that will migrate this registry key, and I will try it out and see if it helped. But this is how you can easily and quickly find out where an application has its fingers in the local file system and in the registry. in case the vendor won't tell you. Now, what can we do when things go wrong? Well, if you still have USMT 4 around, you can open up the USMT shum file. It's still valid to most part in USMT 5, but otherwise you will have to go to the online documentation. And they actually have a really good common issues post around USMT. You can increase logging. So if I open up and go back to my demo machine again, if you need increased logging, you can just open up the ini file, and you can add command lines for increased logging. It'll get you more information in the log files. You can add anything above 5 requires you to attach a debugger. So most technicians, well, this is fine for you if you want more information. If I go to the website I was talking about, this is the list of common issues around USMT. Pretty good stuff. If you get an error code, you can look them up in this documentation as well, or you can simply use the normal command prompt. So if you get the 64.1 error code, it normally means that someone tripped on a cable in the data center. Or if you get the 5 error, it's access denied, and you get the point. Number 2, couldn't find the file, and whatever. 1326, wrong admin, wrong password. So if you get an error code back from USMT, you can look it up here, but they also have tables in the documentation here, the online documentation. So unlike previous releases, there is a really good technical reference around USMT 5 on the TechNet site. Good stuff. Yes? The comment is, if you migrate application settings, the applications actually need to be installed. That is absolutely correct. And if you look into the sequence, you will actually see that the restore action is after applications are being installed. So that's why. Absolutely correct, sir. With that being said, the Deployment Artist website has lists of resources related to deployments. Free stuff, commercial stuff, trainings, videos, books, links to blogs that I normally use and to find out more information about deployment stuff. Deployment research is my blog as well. And please remember to fill in the eval forms or evaluations online, I guess. And thank you for taking your time. Have a great MMS. Thanks.